Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1128. Finally an outcome. East Borough, in a 2-bedroom rental apartment. After receiving Demonis Trissy's reply from Miss Messenger Rionette Tynker, he pulled a chair to sit down and began reading. This means she knows of Mr. Dorr's existence, and she has a way to use the bloodline of the Abraham family to communicate with that entity. Trissy can already withstand Mr. Dorr's cry for help. Isn't she afraid of losing control because of this? Besides, she seems to be very sure of Mr. Dorr's identity. She really has obtained more knowledge and secrets from the primordial Demonis. But in such a situation, why would the Demonis of White Katarina be pursuing her? Questions arose in Klein's mind as he read the short letter. As the matter vaguely mentioned by Trissy was within his understanding, he believed that she wasn't lying in this aspect. Furthermore, she had provided a very feasible solution. Of course, the prerequisite for this method to succeed was first, to obtain the correct ritual, and secondly, be in contact with a descendant of the Abraham family, and thirdly, the descendant had to be willing to take a huge risk, as they used something related to their bloodline as a medium. Of these 3 points, he was missing the first point. He still had some doubts about the third point. He attempted to find a safer and more concealed method, but Demonis Trissy seemed to only lack the second point. To me, it's easy to find the descendants of the Abraham family. I can directly contact them through Miss Magician. However, once I hand over their hair, blood, flesh, and bones to Demonis Trissy, this will put them at risk of being hexed. Klein understood the Demonis pathway rather well and knew that they were very good at hexes. As his thoughts raced, he gradually came up with a countermeasure. It was to use the hair, flesh, or bones of the deceased. He remembered that Miss Magician had mentioned to the fool that she had once buried an old man named Lawrence. He was undoubtedly a descendant of the Abraham family. I hope it wasn't a cremation. Although this is somewhat sacrilegious to a corpse, speaking to Mr. Dorr is a necessary procedure to dispel the Abraham family's ancient curse. It's better to use the dead rather than implicate the living. When the time comes, I'll add this in Trissy's reply. I'll claim that this is a requirement stipulated by the descendant of the Abraham family for the ritual's medium. Also, I have to first confirm that Trissy is going to speak to Mr. Dorr, and not attempt to pull him back to the real world. They are either of a high level or are involved in high-level situations. It will be difficult to obtain any effective revelations using divination, but Emperor Roselle said that the ritual required to facilitate Mr. Dorr's return is very complicated. It definitely can't be set up by a small number of descendants. I can get Queen Mystic and Miss Sharon to monitor Backlund's underground market, and see if there are any abnormal trades of materials and personnel. Klein nodded slightly, and decided to find Miss Magician in a while. He could also rush her writing. North Borough, Phelps Street. On a bench, a young man in a black trench coat and silk top hat was sitting there with a thin face and a broad forehead. He looked at the withered and yellow intis parasol trees in a daze. He wore a crystal-carved monocle on his right eye, looking rather refined. At that moment, an elder who was heading to St. Samuel Cathedral stopped in his tracks when he saw that something was amiss. He asked gently, "Young man, what are you worried about? You lost something in this war?" He suspected that the young man's relatives, lover, or friends had died in the air raid or during intense battles at the front lines. That was why he was sitting alone by the side of the street, looking lost. The young man raised his hand and pinched his monocle. He sighed and shook his head. "I'm just thinking about some rather complicated questions." "Are you a philosopher?" The old man was taken aback as he blurted out. "No, but I often bring up philosophical problems for others, just like who I am, where I am, and what's my future." The young man smiled calmly as he continued to ponder. From time to time, he would purse his lips and whisper silently. The elder couldn't understand him and could only shake his head. Under the gaze of the stray dogs, sparrows, ants, and microbes in the air, he slowly left. The young man didn't turn his head. His monocle reflected yellow leaves that were floating down as he muttered to himself. To parasite, to not parasite, to parasite, Do not parasite, see the bait, devour the bait, see the bait, devour the bait. After getting the hair from Lawrence's remains from furs, and seeing the horror stories of Backland hospitals being serialized in the Tussock Times, Klein entered a patient state. He also promised to send Miss Magician to a new place next week to record new sights and customs. Soon, a new week had arrived. After having his lunch, he planned to take a short nap to prepare for the 3 o'clock tarot gathering. At this moment, Rionette Tinker, who was holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads, walked out from the depths of the void. One of them had a linen bag in its mouth. Who sent it? Klein suddenly had an inexplicable feeling. He had a complicated premonition as he didn't immediately reach out to receive the bag Miss Messenger was holding. Rionette Tinker's 3 free heads spoke one after another. The real, mutated king of mushrooms. This string of words. I roughly understand what's going on. Klein controlled his expression of not baring his teeth as he slowly took the bag. When he opened the bag, he wasn't surprised to see copious amounts of demons, no mushrooms. Some of them were white and full, as though they would spurt out milk with a single poke. Some of them were black at the bottom and were embedded with thin blood-colored lines and markings. Some of them were covered in golden stars, and the mushroom cap was as large as a palm. At that moment, the mushrooms were still squirming slightly, as though they wanted to spread their hyphae and spores. After swallowing his saliva, he picked up a letter that was surrounded by mushrooms, and he started reading. My dear friend Gehrman, I've finally completed your request. I've invented mushrooms that can be planted in dark and harsh environments. They can grow by devouring the flesh and blood of monsters, without any other conditions. Their descendants will be divided into 2 categories. The first type will accumulate various kinds of poisons that cannot be eaten. However, they can be used as a source of poison. The other type can be used for food after being cooked at high temperatures through boiling, stewing, and frying. You must remember not to eat it raw or before it's cooked. Otherwise, they will proliferate in your body, using your flesh and blood as a hotbed. In consideration of having a variety of flavors, I've invented 11 kinds of mushrooms. Some are rich in milk. This can be directly drunk. Some are like beef. When frying them, there's no need to provide any extra oil. Some are as delicate as fish but without the bones. My suggestion is to roast or boil it. All of these wouldn't have been possible without your help. If I hadn't already advanced and become a druid, I might have taken a few years, or even more than a decade, to resolve all the problems I encountered during the experimentation process. If you have any other ideas that are suitable for me, please share them with me. Your friend forever, Frank Lee. With the letter in hand, Klein fell silent for a long time. He looked up and realized that Miss Messenger was still waiting. He sighed silently and walked to the desk. He took out a piece of paper and a pen and slowly wrote. I'm very happy that you've succeeded. These mushrooms will help me greatly. They will effectively reduce famine in certain areas. I'm currently busy with some matters, so I don't have any new ideas for now. Your friend, Gehrman Sparrow. After folding the letter, he looked at Miss Messenger and hesitantly asked, How's Frank Lee's condition like now? The head that Rionette Tinker had previously failed to say anything spoke first. Excited. The other 3 added. Animated, happy, satisfied. Following that, the 4 heads said, No longer afraid of being buried in soil. Why? Klein subconsciously asked. The 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in Rionette Tinker's hand spat out word by word. He can extract the soil's nutrients and oxygen. Frank has really evolved quite a bit after becoming a druid. For a moment, Klein wasn't sure if he should be happy for his friend, or if he should grieve for the crew of the future. As he watched Miss Messenger leave, Klein forced himself to sleep through cogitation. Then, he woke up at 2:30 p.m. to prepare for this week's tarot gathering. At 3 o'clock, dark red beams of light rose up from the ancient palace above the gray fog and solidified into their corresponding figures. Audrey immediately stood up, curtsied, and bowed towards the end of the long bronze table. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. As a senior psychiatrist, she had great control over her emotions. Furthermore, she hadn't encountered any problems this week. She was mainly seeking out donations, contacting pharmaceutical factories, and organizing medical volunteers. However, compared to the past, the cheerfulness and happiness she had when making her greeting had decreased significantly. The Fool Klein nodded slightly in response to the greetings from the members of the Tarot Club. Following that, he cast his gaze at the hermit. He still owed this lady 8 questions. Katla bowed her head and said with an unfaultable attitude, "Honorable Mr. Fool, there are still 2 questions this time." After obtaining approval, she continued, "The first question is, what is the state of the devils in the abyss?" Queen Mystic's first suspicion is that the Emperor's mausoleum is hidden in the abyss. This is identical to the Emperor's train of thought. She is indeed his biological daughter. Unfortunately, there are no citizens that can be controlled there. The Fool Klein muttered to himself inwardly as he answered with an unchanging expression. The current abyss is a place most devils are unable to live in.